Welcome back to Outside View Scandals. Today we're taking a deep dive into one of the darkest chapters of religious history, the Inquisition. Now, when most people think of the Inquisition, images of torture chambers, burning stakes, and wrongful executions tend to come to mind. And believe me, those images aren't far off. The Inquisition, originally intended to root out heresy and protect the faith, quickly became a tool for power, for abuse, and, let's face it, downright cruelty. It wasn't exactly the Church's finest hour. But as we know, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and the Inquisition was no exception. Established in the 12th century, the Inquisition had a noble-sounding goal: to preserve the purity of the Christian faith. Sounds innocent enough, right? Wrong. What started as a way to address theological differences soon turned into a witch hunt, sometimes literally. The Church gave inquisitors near unlimited authority to accuse, try, and punish heretics. But here's the kicker. The definition of heresy was incredibly broad. Disagree with the Church? Heretic. Question religious practices? Heretic. Have a bad haircut? Well, maybe not, but it wasn't far off. The Church wasn't exactly picky when it came to deciding who was guilty. And now let's talk about those accused. You didn't have to actually do anything wrong. You just had to be suspected. And in many cases, that was enough. Accusations could come from anywhere: your neighbor, your family, or even someone with a personal grudge. Yes, people used the Inquisition as their own personal revenge tool. Got a problem with your neighbor? Just accuse them of heresy, sit back, and let the Inquisition do the dirty work. And dirty work it was. Once accused, the odds were not really in your favor. Inquisitors employed methods that make modern interrogations look like a day at the spa. Torture was not only permitted, but encouraged. And the idea was to extract a confession. And a confession was key. After all, a confession meant the Church could see, we were right all along. Of course, when you are stretched on a rack or burned with hot irons, you'll confess to just about anything. Who wouldn't? And once you confessed, your fate was sealed. Many heretics were handed over to secular authorities for execution. Because the Church didn't want to get its hands dirty. It was all very tidy. And by tidy, I mean horrific. Perhaps the most infamous version of the Inquisition was the Spanish Inquisition, which kicked off in 1478. Now, Spain had its own unique flavor of religious zealotry, and the Inquisition there was particularly brutal. And its goal? To ensure that converts from Judaism and Islam were generally practicing Christianity. But of course, it wasn't just about faith. It was also about control and wealth. Oh yes, there was a financial angle to all of this. When someone was found guilty of heresy, their property was often confiscated by the Church or the state. So not only could you rid yourself of an annoying neighbor, but you might also get their land in the process. Convenient, right? And let's not forget the role of fear. The Inquisition wasn't just about punishing heretics, it was about sending a message. A message that said, don't even think about stepping out of line. The threat of the Inquisition hung over Europe like a dark cloud. People were terrified. One wrong move, one misplaced word, and you could find yourself on trial, facing torture and possible execution. It's safe to say that due process wasn't exactly a priority. But while the Inquisition wielded immense power, it wasn't without its critics. Some within the Church began to question the methods and motives of the inquisitors. And no wonder many of these so-called trials were nothing more than a farce. Accusations were often based on hearsay, confessions were forced under duress, and executions were carried out with little regard for actual guilt or innocence. But did that stop the Inquisition? Not at all. It kept rolling along, crushing dissent and enforcing conformity, all in the name of religious purity. It wasn't just the average person who was at risk. The inquisitors went after scholars, scientists, and even clergy members who dared to question the established order. And one of the most famous victims of the Inquisition's wrath was Galileo Galilei. You know, the guy who had the audacity to suggest that the earth revolved around the sun. Well, the church wasn't having any of that. Galileo was tried for heresy, forced to recant his scientific findings, and spent the rest of his life under house arrest. So not only was the Inquisition suppressing religious dissent, but they were also holding back scientific progress. Talk about a double whammy. Over the centuries, the Inquisition evolved, or rather devolved, into a force that stifled intellectual, cultural, and religious freedom across Europe. And while it technically ended in the 19th century, its legacy of fear and repression lingered for much longer. But here's the irony. The Inquisition, which was meant to root out heresy and protect the faith, may have actually done more harm to the Church's reputation than any heretic ever could. By abusing its power, the Inquisition showed just how corrupt an institution can become when it's driven by fear and control rather than compassion and understanding. So what can we learn from this? Maybe that institutions, especially those with unchecked power, have a tendency to go off the rails, or that sometimes the greatest threat to a belief system isn't outside forces, but the very people who claim to protect it. So, thanks for watching Outside View Scandals once again. Stay tuned for more stories from the darker corners of history. And remember, when someone says they are acting in the name of righteousness, it might be worth taking a closer look at their methods. And if you want to see another video, the next one is right here in the end screen.